Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Randy Pennington, author of Make Change Work. Randy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul, thank you. I appreciate it.
Are you ready to get started?
I am ready. Let's rock and roll.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I will tell you, Paul, I come from the perspective of writing nonfiction, and I'm a business book writer. And so my very first important lesson that I've learned is to know what you want the book to do for you. I think sometimes as authors, we think we'll write this book, but for example, I know if I want the goal to be executives to read this book and bring me in to consult or speak, I channel it one way. If I want it to generate training programs, I channel it a different way. If I want it to be in the self-help market, I might channel it a different way. It may all be the same book, but I think clarity is the most important lesson I've learned about what you want your book to do for you.
Yeah, one of the first questions I always ask my clients is, what's the main thing that you want to get out of this book? So that's definitely great advice. You have to be really clear on that before you even get started. Absolutely,
because it changes everything about what you write and how you write it.
Yeah, I always call it, running the book like a business, because there's hobbies and there's businesses, and you always want to run it like a business.
Absolutely.
What do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, I think the hardest part, if you want to go with a traditional publisher, and I have written all my books with traditional publishers, and so I don't really do the the self-publish or the hybrid publish model. But the hardest part for traditional publishers is understanding that the quality of the book is secondary to the expansiveness of your marketplace and your marketing plan and the quality of your marketing plan. More and more I see the traditional publishers that I work with want to know from first-time authors especially, tell me your social media reach, tell me your mailing list, tell me how many speeches you do, tell me how you're doing to promote it. What's your platform that's going to help them launch and push this book? And I think that's the hardest part of getting published, because very often we're doing the book to build our platform, and publishers more and more today are saying, we want you to have a platform before you come to us.
Now, you're actually a third guest in a row that has specifically talked about that, because that seems to be the big thing this day. It's all about having that established platform, and if you have it, it's so much easier to get one of those traditional publishing deals.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, that's why there's so many other opportunities for publishing now. And when I go back to what's the purpose of your book, for example, if you want to be a speaker who sells books at the back of the room, probably the worst place you can go, if it's just a money generator for you, the worst place you can go is a traditional publisher, because it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to buy copies of that book. So if you're sure that what you want to do is sell the book yourself primarily, then you really ought to pursue a self-publishing or hybrid publishing model.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you've used in your book launches that has worked well.
The best thing that I've done, the best two things that I've done, Paul, are one, leverage my colleagues who also have a strong platform. So, for example, one of the books that I've written is a book called Results Rule. And when that book launched, we knew within about a 3-day period, there was going to be an announcement to over 1 million people about that book from credible sources who the people getting the message from already had a relationship with or trust in. And word of mouth is the strongest support. And so if you can find people who will help you launch. That is a crucial piece of marketing. The other thing that we've done that I think works really well is I buy books or get books as part of my contract, and I send them to CEOs. My last book, Make Change Work, we sent 500 copies of that book out to CEOs. And it's CEOs with either whom we've worked in the past or that we want to work in the future. And the purpose is it provides the introduction. And in more than one case, they've come back and said, gee, this is a book. We not only want you to come and work with us, this is a book that we need for all of our managers or all of our leaders, or in some cases, all of our employees.
When you mentioned two great strategies with that, and the first thing I'd like to ask is, what advice would you give to our listeners on how to leverage the different colleagues that they have who have those established platforms, and if they don't necessarily know someone who has one of those types of established platforms, how can they reach out to someone who does?
Oh, it's a great question. Sadly, and I say this sadly, but it is a viable strategy. There are people who, with established platforms, who will allow you to be on their platform and push a book out for you for a price. I always avoid those folks, but I do know that they exist and that I've had people tell me that they work. So if you don't have that, then you might consider at least exploring that. Now, when I go to my colleagues, Paul, one of the things that I do is I usually start by, I don't ask anyone to help me that I haven't offered to help in the past. So I make a conscious effort to build my network, to build that cadre of friends and colleagues who I know that they like me, I like them, we respect each other, we've helped each other out in the past. And so when a friend of mine calls and says, hey, can you push this out to your list, or can you promote this on social media, or would you read it and do a video promotion for me, all of which I've done in the past, I look for every reason to say yes. Now, if somebody new does that to me, if somebody new says, hey, can I show you this book and have you consider it? The one thing I would say is, don't assume that they're going to say yes. It's really just like getting an endorsement for your book. You have to prove to them that your book is worthwhile, and they won't necessarily put their name on your book, even if it is for an endorsement or sending it out to their list. So you got to start with a quality book. But there are plenty of people out there. If you go through, think of who is in the marketplace where you want to be, and if you approach them honestly with respect and simply say, I'd like to show you this book, and if possible, can you either endorse it? By the way, if they've endorsed it, there's a high probability they will push it to their group. Or if they want to endorse it, at least maybe send out a quick blurb on their email to their list.
Yeah, that is great advice, and I appreciate you sharing that. One thing I'd also like to ask you in regards to sending those copies, those paperback copies to CEOs, you mentioned these are CEOs that you've already reached out to, or were you also sending maybe some cold messages to those guys going, hey, I'd love to send you a paperback copy of my book? How did that process work?
Yeah, actually, I send a hardback copy of the book.
Oh.
And I send them right. The one that I get from the publisher is the one that I send. One of two ways. I've done it a couple of ways. One is I've sent a personal letter to them with the book endorsed to them, and said, one of the things I've always respected about you as a leader is I personalize that for every person that I'm going to send to. Because of reading this about what you've said, I thought you might enjoy this book. I hope that you do enjoy it. Please let me know if there's any way we can be of assistance. And I don't make a pitch to sell. I don't make a pitch to buy my book. I just make it a personal gift from me to them. Now, the other way that I've done it is I have, again, enlisted some friends over the years to send it to their colleagues, or if I have a client that I've worked with for a while and I have a good relationship, I'll ask them, would you like to send this to one of your colleagues, a peer in another organization, that you would like, that you know would like this book, and if I sign the book to them, will you send the letter to them? And I found that works very well as well too.
Yeah, those are great strategies, and I really appreciate you sharing that with our audience. Let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I saw that question you're going to ask, and I'm going to give you two books because this actually is one of my favorite books. And I also think it's an important book that every person listening to this podcast needs to read. It's Stephen King on Writing. And if you haven't read that book, whether you like Stephen King as a writer or not, or whether you read his work or not, I think it would be anyone would be hard pressed to believe that there's anyone more successful as a writer than Stephen King has been over the years. And Stephen King on Writing is just one of my very favorite books, not only about writing, but I just like the book. And here's the one thing that I took from that book. There's so much in it. There's a whole piece in there about passive verbs and inactive and active verbs, and his preference clearly for active verbs. But this one line in this book, I've got it underlined and highlighted and everything else in the book. Here's the line: "The adverb is not your friend." And I just love that. I just think that is so crucial on being a great writer, is to understand that there is power in succinctness. There's power in using the active voice rather than the passive voice. And so from a writing standpoint, that is absolutely one of my very favorite books. Beyond that, my other favorite book is by a guy named Pat Conroy. I don't know if you know that name or not. Pat Conroy wrote The Great Santini, but he also wrote a book called My Losing Season. And My Losing Season describes his senior year playing basketball for the Citadel. And I love this book, Paul, for two reasons. One, the writing is just so good. But the others, the story resonated with me. And the story sort of echoes because I identified with it. The story begins, the prologue of the book begins with this line: "I was born to be a point guard, but not a very good one." And again, that to me just sort of says it all. It captures immediately who he is and what the book is going to be about. The clarity of the writing is just so good in this book that I think that those two are just two of my very favorites.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Wow, I saw that you were going to ask that question. And here is the quote that immediately came to mind. I mean, I would love to tell you one of my quotes is probably my favorite. And there's one by Pat Summitt, former head basketball coach of the University of Tennessee, that sticks out. And it says, "If you don't want the responsibility, don't sit in the big chair. That's the deal." And that to me, I think is the essence of whether you're trying to be successful in life or write a great book or start a great business, to realize that it's your responsibility. And if you don't want to take that responsibility, then don't sit in the big chair.
Well, Randy, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way to find me online is on our website. It's PenningtonGroup.com. Pennington Group is all one word, .com. If you type in Randy Pennington, pretty much anywhere you'll find me on social media. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all those places. But PenningtonGroup.com is the best place to find us.
Well, Randy, thank you again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
I appreciate it. Good luck to you too, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.